Hello, in this lesson I will show a basic Git workflow from the very beginning. I will install Git, set up username and user email, create my first repository, and then explain git init, git status, git add, git commit, and gitignore file. This is an important foundation for everyone who is learning Git, GitHub or DevOps, because this is where it becomes clear how to git tracks changes and how to save them correctly into history. By the end of this lesson, we will already have our first proper repository and our first commit. First, I will install Git. Without it, the other commands will not work. I'm using Ubuntu, so I do it like this: sudo apt update need to wait a little bit. Yeah, and sudo install git -y. Так, instructions. Okay, after the installation, I immediately check that Git is really available in the system. Git version. I can see the Git version, so everything was installed correctly. The idea here is very simple. Git is a normal program that I first install on my computer, and only after that do I create repositories and start working with change history. Git is installed. Now I need to do the next thing: set up the after-name and email. Git uses this information to sign my commits. I run this command: git config global username Alex and email Alex my mail. .com. Here, the --global flag means that the settings will be saved for all repositories on this computer. Then I can check that everything was saved. Git config global list. And here it is important not to confuse things. Username and user email are not your GitHub login and not your GitHub password. They are simply the after-name and email address that Git will show in commit history. So, every time I save changes, Git understands who made them. Git is already installed, the after is configured. Now we can move to the next question: what a repository actually is. If I explain it in a very simple way, a repository is a project folder where Git tracks changes. So I have a normal directory with files. For example, it can contain a website, config files, bash scripts, or some other project, as long as it is just a normal folder. Git knows nothing about it, but as soon as I turn it into a repository, Git starts to see which files appeared, which ones changed, and what can be saved into history. In other words, a repository is a project under Git control. Now, I will show this right way in practice. I will create a new folder and turn it into my first Git repository. First, I create a folder for the project and move into it. mkdir my first repo. Now I run the main command git init. Yeah. The git init command initialized a new Git repository in the current folder. After that, Git creates a hidden service directory inside it called point git. Yeah. This is where the internal repository information is stored. So, from the outside, it is still just a normal project folder. But now, Git can already track changes inside it. A repository is not something separate or complicated. It is the same folder, but now it is connected to Git. I created the repository. Now I need to understand how Git works with changes inside it. For that, I will explain three key things: the working directory, the staging area, and the commit. This is the most important part for understanding Git. First, the working directory. These are my normal files inside the project folder. I open a file, write something, remove lines, add new text. All of this happens in the working directory. Next, the staging area. This is an intermediate area before the commit. Here I place only the changes that I want to save in the next commit. And the last thing is the commit. This is already a saved point in the project history. So the logic is like this. First, I change files in the working directory. Then I choose the needed changes and send them to the staging area. And only after that do I create a commit, which means I save those changes into history. You can imagine it very simply. The working directory is the place where I work right now. The staging area is the preparation before saving. The commit is the already saved version of the project. For example, I create my first file. Ouch. Now the file already exists in the project folder. Yep. But that does not mean it is already in Git history. First, Git must see this file. Then I must clearly tell Git that I want to include it in the next commit, and only after that will I save it in the history. To see all of this step by step, there is the git status command. This command shows the current state of the repository. In simple words, Git tells me what changed, which files are new, which files are already prepared for commit, and which ones are not. For example, if I just created file app.txt, Git may show that it is an untracked file. This means the file is already inside the folder, but Git has not started tracking it yet. That is exactly why Git status is very useful. I look at it and immediately understand what stage I am at right now. First, I create the repository, one status. Then I created a new file. Now the status is different. After preparing the file for commit, the status will change again. So right now, Git shows that the file is not prepared yet. To prepare it for commit, there is the git add command. If I explain it simply, git add moves changes from the working directory to the staging area. For example, if I want to add the file app.txt, I write this: git add app.txt. If I want to add all changes in the current folder at once, I can write this: git add point same. But here it is important to understand the meaning. Git add doesn't make a commit. This command only prepares changes for the commit. It is like I am telling Git, those are the changes I selected, and those are the changes I want to save in the next version of the project. After that, I check the repository state again. Git status. Now Git shows that the file is already in the staging area, and this is where Git logic becomes clear. Changes do not go into history automatically. First, I choose the needed files myself with git add, and only after that do I save them into history. To save the prepared changes, there is the git commit command. The git commit command saves the prepared changes into repository history. Usually, I use this form: git commit -m, and here some message. The -m flag lets me write the commit message right away inside quotes. For example, I can write this: add app.txt. Yes. A commit message is a short description of what exactly I saved. And here it is important to understand the main idea. A commit is not just a save bottom. A commit is a saved point in project history. This means Git remembers the state of the changes that were in the staging area at that moment. After the commit, I can run again git status. And if everything went well, Git will show that there are no new changes now. This is what the basic Git workflow looks like. I change files, then I check Git status, then I run git add, and after that I create git commit. The basic foundation is ready. Now I only need to explain one more very practical thing: the gitignore file. I create the gitignore file. Ouch. Point gitignore. The gitignore file is needed so that Git does not try to track unnecessary files. For example, projects often have logs, temporary files, cache files, local settings. Usually, all of this should not be stored in the repository. I open the gitignore file and end, for example, this line. Point this point log. Yes. This means ignore all files with the point log extension. I tell Git in advance which files it should not track. For example, now I create the file debug log. touch debug log. Yes, we have this file. Let's us check whether Git tracks it. Git status. As you can see, Git does not show this file as a new file for tracking, because in gitignore I already have a rule for all files with a point log extension. This is why it is better to add the gitignore file to the project right from the start. Then the repository stays clean and tidy from the first steps. At this point, I already have the full basic workflow. I installed Git, configured the after, create a repository, added a file, made the first commit, and step ignoring unnecessary files. In this lesson, I installed Git, configured username and user email, and created my first repository with git init. Then I explained how the working directory, the staging area, and the commit work. And I showed the basic commands git status, git add, and git commit. I also explained what the gitignore file is and why it is better to add it right at the beginning of the project. In the next lesson, I will explain change history, show git log and git diff, and also explain basic ways to undo mistakes, so it will be clear how to fix simple errors calmly.